from the Middle East. You were in Egypt, you were in Lebanon. Let's first talk about Syria, because it's the place that everyone's trying to figure out, and none of us can get into Syria, but Lebanon is the closest you can get. What's your sense?
Well, a couple of things strike you when you're in Beirut, Fried. The first thing that strikes you is how incredibly brave the Syrian people who have been resisting their authoritarian government have been. You know, when Egyptians gathered in Tahrir Square, one thing they knew for sure, after the initial effort by government thugs to put them down, when the army stepped in, they knew they were safe. They knew they could go down to the square, and they gathered there, you know, by the tens and hundreds and thousands and even over a million. Syrians, when they walk out the door to protest, they know they're dealing with a government and a regime that will gun them down, and has killed somewhere between 900 and 1,000 already. Wounded, we have no idea how many, and jailed. We understand them literally stadiums, you know, being used in big facilities to hold all these people. And yet they still come out. And that is quite remarkable. And it shows you again this level of incredible, I mean, not only the tyranny of these regimes, but this deep desire for dignity, justice, and freedom, which just transcends everything and spreads across that region. And so that's what's most impressive. Now, Syria, of course, this is complicated. It's the keystone of really the whole Levant. You know, you change Egypt, you have a big impact on the Middle East, but mostly you change Egypt. You change Libya, you change Libya. You know, you change Bahrain, like Egypt implodes, Libya implodes, Bahrain implodes, Syria explodes. Because if the government there came down, it's not like Egypt. Egypt, you had the regime and you had the army, a totally separate institution. In Syria, they are basically one and the same. So if the Syrian regime goes down, the whole state collapses. The Syrian state collapses. That affects power relationships in Lebanon with Hezbollah, Syria's main client. It affects Turkey, which has, Syria has a big Kurdish population, a big Alawite population, as does Turkey. There are huge issues there about border. It affects Iraq and the stability of the Iraqi-Syrian border. It affects Israel, and it affects Iran, it affects Jordan. So basically, the whole Middle East would potentially change.
Egypt, we did the show from Egypt last week, and I was struck by how unfinished that revolution seems. I mean, we've stopped paying attention, but you go there and it's still very much an ongoing question about what's going to happen.
We're in a critical moment there, Fried, and it's one that has to be dealt with not by speech and not by writing a check, but with really active, smart, and subtle diplomacy. What is this moment? The Egyptian army, which is the authority now, basically Mubarak having been ousted, has basically set a pathway forward of how Egypt progresses from Tahrir Square. First, we have parliamentary elections, they said. Then the parliament will write a new constitution or assign people to do it, and then we'll have presidential elections. Sounds good on paper. Here's one problem. The only people organized now for the parliamentary election, which has been set for September, are the Muslim Brotherhood, because they've had a party living underground, which now just, basically, I went to their new headquarters. They inaugurated last week. Beautiful building, you know. They're very happy to give you a tour. They're all ready to go. But the whole strength of the Tahrir movement was that it never had a leader. It was broad-based. In fact, deliberately they didn't, so there was no one to arrest. You had to arrest all the Egyptian people. Wonderful for a revolution, not good for running an election. And that's where we, I think, really need to weigh in. Leading Egyptian figures who you interviewed, Mohammed al-Baradei, Amr Moussa, have come out and appealed to the generals to postpone the elections so everybody has a chance to get organized. I think quietly, subtly, we need to let the generals know that that is where we are going to be. You know, I have a motto about the Middle East, which is, when it comes to elections, the Arab world has had so few free and fair elections that when they have one, everybody wants to vote. Yeah, not just the people in that country. You can bet people in Saudi Arabia will want to vote with their donations, and in Qatar, and in the UAE, and a lot of those are going to go to the Muslim Brotherhood. All I say is, we need to vote too.
And there is a powerful role for the United States. I mean, this is one of those kind of crises we were talking about earlier, which was unexpected. But this is going to be a very important defining moment for Obama's foreign policy.
Yeah, and I've had a chance to cover many secretaries of state, and every one of them has a moment. You know, with Jim Baker, it was the fall of the Berlin Wall. With Colin Powell, it was the Iraq War. With Madeleine Albright, it was Kosovo. With Warren Christopher, it was Bosnia. You never see it coming when you came into office. You know, you go back to their openings, they never saw it coming. But ultimately, they are defined by how well they manage it. as much as control they have over it. I think that will be true for Secretary Clinton. I think this whole Arab Spring, not only for her, but obviously for President Obama as well, how they manage it is going to be very central to how they're perceived in foreign policy. And that's not to say I don't want to hold the bar up too high. As I said earlier, events in the ground are in the cockpit, but we need to understand when just a little voice here and a little voice there, like, maybe you guys should delay this election 3 months until the progressives and all the parties get organized, can be hugely decisive. Because this bus, Fried, it's not going to come around again. You're not going to get another Egyptian election. Oh, we missed this bus. You know, this is really important.
Tom Friedman, pleasure as always.
Great, Fried. Thank you.
And we will be back.